dyslexia, if you're working with students that are maybe struggling readers or struggle to read a print book, you can customize the size of the text and make it a large print book. You can customize the font. You can use an open dyslexic font within Sora. And you can change the backlighting, all to find whatever is the most comfortable mode of reading for your students. You also have the ability to assign titles. So if your school or your class specifically needs a class set of something or is doing a whole school read, if you're doing book clubs, you can assign those titles out. And that's one of the things we'll talk about a little bit down the line. You also have offline access, meaning as long as you're connected to the internet when you borrow the book, it will automatically download to your device. And you can then use that ebook or audiobook offline. So whether you're traveling for summer vacation, if you're in a place that maybe doesn't have reliable access to the internet, you can always access that book once it's downloaded to your device. You have exportable notes and highlights here as well. So when you're in the book, you can actually annotate as you go along, take notes, highlight passages of the text. It's a very important tool because then you can then export those notes and those highlights directly to Google Drive or Google Classroom and share them with your teacher. So you can be answering questions in the book. You can be pulling out certain passages for maybe a book report or a paper that you're writing. It's a very easy tool to use. And then finally, one of the last features we're going to talk about here is the fact that you can also access public library collections through Sora. So when you log into Sora, by default, you will have the citywide digital library, which has just about 30,000 unique titles, hundreds of thousands of copies. But then you can also add the New York Public Library, the Brooklyn Public Library, and the Queens Public Library, and have access to their collections as well. For the New York Public Library and the Brooklyn Public Library, you will need a public library card to access those books. And for the Queens Public Library, you'll be able to use your DOE login to go ahead and access those. All right. I do want to mention with that the Citywide Digital Library has what we call content access levels in place, but essentially it will block younger students from seeing books that are inappropriate or outside of their grade level in terms of what's appropriate, not necessarily their reading level. But there are 3 different levels based on the grade that the students are in, and it's automatically recognizing what grade they're in when they log in. So you as a staff member, when you log in, you'll see everything in the collection, okay? But just keep that in mind. And I'm going to pass it over to Tracy to talk about why digital at all.
Thank you, Regis. And I have feverishly been answering questions, although I think I skipped a few as we were making it through, but there are a lot of questions on pre-K and if there are resources to support pre-K, and the answer to that is definitely yes. There are a lot. There was also one question that I do want to answer live around F&P leveling and whether that's available in the books. And the answer to that, unfortunately, is no, because the F&P does not allow other vendors to have access to that leveling. But there are tools that you can use built into Sora, and we'd be happy to talk to you about using curated lists, for example, to guide kids to the correct level of books. You can assign, you can share through deep linking those particular titles. So if you need specific questions, please don't hesitate to reach out directly to us. And the email address that's super easy to reach us in is nycsora@overdrive.com. Again, nycsora, SORA, @overdrive.com. So as Regis let in before I interrupted with answering some questions live, why digital? And I know that much of the Citywide Digital Library came out of the need to get books in the hands of kids during remote learning and the pandemic. But the reality is digital is super important as a skill development for all of our kids from now on. It used to be a nice to have, it's now a must have. And part of the reason for that is one of the things that was hugely apparent during remote learning was the equity and access to resources for our kids. So the beautiful thing about digital is instant access on any device, anytime, anywhere. You only need access to the internet for a very short period of time in order to download or access the resources, and then you can read them on or offline. But the other thing that's really important is the development of those deep, sustained digital reading skills. And you can feel free to throw your answer in the chat, but if I were to ask you, what percentage of your professional reading is done on a screen, email, computer screen, etc., I would hazard to guess that it's somewhere north of 50% and more likely to be somewhere in the first few answers I saw, 100%, 75, 90. It's most of it. And our schools across the country are doing very little to help build those deep, sustained digital reading skills. And so by working with independent reading and choice reading through the Citywide Digital Library, or transitioning a small part or all of your curriculum reading to digital, you're not only going to be building those valuable reading skills, but you're going to also be developing those deep, sustained digital reading skills so that our kids in the future are not like me. When I see a long email, an attachment longer than a page, they don't instantly hit that print button. And we're preparing them for their assessments online, etc. So it's really important to start thinking about why teaching with digital is important, not as a replacement temporarily for access to physical books. It's a balancing act. You don't need only one or the other, but finding a hybrid. Now, we also know that digital is going to help with vocabulary development. You can define words, you can hear them pronounced, all because you're reading a digital book. And then, of course, helping kids develop those note-taking skills. And by moving some of that required reading to digital, you're able to better support some kids who might otherwise be forced to work in a different platform or environment than the rest of their peers. For example, your special ed, your ELL, your dyslexic readers, we want to make sure that if everyone's using Sora, no one needs to know whether they have the graphic novel instead of the full text of Romeo and Juliet, or if they are reading with the dyslexic font, or that they're reading below grade level because I might choose to make my font larger. All of that is masked by moving everyone to the same platform. Regis? Next slide. The beautiful thing about Sora is that it can meet so many different needs. So we've talked about reading engagement, library use. We can also use it for professional development titles, and there are a lot of those in the Citywide Digital Library already, in helping support students and provide access to collections that are uniquely important, like social emotional learning resources. Sora also connects to your public library, so your students can have access to the Citywide Digital Library, any content that your school purchases for Sora, and all 3 of the New York public libraries, all in one platform, which really exponentially expands their access to content. And then, of course, I mentioned curriculum as a key component as well. Next slide. One of the really wonderful opportunities that we will have is what I've mentioned a few times, is customizing it for your school. Somebody chimed in the Q&A earlier. I work in a school that's bilingual Russian. Do you have Russian content? Yes, we do in the Citywide Digital Library, already there, along with many other languages. But that's a unique need for that particular school. So they may need more Russian content than the general Citywide Digital Library can provide. So you're able to build a sub collection, which we often call an advantage account, because it's an advantage for your students to have access to that collection. It's also, as I was talking about, that importance of providing general access to books 24/7. We want to make sure that we're building those deep, sustained digital reading skills, preparing our kids for life in a post K-12 world, in a post K-12 world that is almost 100% digital. And we want to be able to meet whatever your particular needs are. So if you have a librarian in your school, you should contact them about any specific support you need around Sora and content that you need to support the learning in your classroom. If you do not have a librarian, you can reach out, have your principal, your AP reach out directly to Sora about setting up your Advantage account and beginning the process of curating collections to meet your particular needs. Our ultimate goal at Overdrive, at Sora, with the Citywide Digital Library and the DOE is to ensure that all kids have access to high quality digital resources and that they have those all the time. There's some pretty impressive stats on the number of books that have been accessed through the Citywide Digital Library this calendar year. We're getting really close to having 1 million checkouts for the DOE Citywide Digital Library. And you saw all of the people who were commenting that they hadn't even started using it yet. So there are lots of resources that are available at no cost to your school directly in that collection. Excuse me, allergy season here, folks. And if you are using a particular curriculum, Regis, next slide. Or if you have a homegrown curriculum, we are happy to help with things like whole class reads. Everybody in third grade is reading fill in the blank title. Choice units, where you don't know how many copies you might need of a given title. Classroom collections, which are often needing to be replaced almost annually because of how much use they are getting. We have the ability to help support the growth of that and utilizing both the Citywide Digital Library collection, but also custom collections in your school. And again, a huge area of growth and demand is around audiobook support for your struggling readers, for the ability for kids to hear the language spoken, the cadence in which people speak and that books are read, the ability to hear words pronounced. Teachers don't always have the chance to do all of that reading themselves. And so audiobooks are a wonderful support in your classroom, not only for individual students, but for large class instruction as well. Regis? We work with a lot of the curriculum vendors. These are just some samplings of folks that we work with. I know a number of schools in the DOE, for example, use EL education. As I mentioned before, if you're using something other than ones you see on your screen, that does not mean we don't have the content. The Overdrive catalog of available resources is over 4.5 million titles. So chances are we will have the content that you need. I will let you know though, some books are not available digitally, just period, not at Overdrive. They just were never made because the licensing wasn't something that people could even conceive of at the time that that book was read or was written. So just let us know. If you have a list of books that you need access to, somebody reached out this morning about AP titles in Spanish. So just let us know and we'll work with you to find those lists. Regis, next slide. Now, core curriculum in the DOE does offer the option to purchase currently 4 different curriculum through Sora for access in a digital format. Educating Powerful Writers, EL or Expeditionary Learning 1 and 2, and Passports to Social Studies. All of those resources your school can opt in to making available in a digital format in place of or in addition to having access to print. And your building principals and purchasing folks will be able to guide that conversation if you need to purchase through Core. Next slide. And Regis, I think you're going to take it home.
Sorry, I lost the mute button there. Excellent. Thanks, Tracy. So one of the things we want to talk about now is not just the books themselves and how they're being used in the classroom, but how that gives you additional data to look into with your students. So when you're using a digital book, an ebook or an audiobook through the Citywide Digital Library and on Sora as the platform, we're able to see how much the student is actually reading. So you can see some examples of data on the side there. The first one being more aggregate level data, more school-wide level data. So you could see for your whole school, how many books are being read, how much total time is being spent reading, how do students prefer to read, ebook, audiobook, those sort of macro level trends. And then you can see below that an example of some student-specific data. How many books have they been reading? How much time have they spent reading in a given time span? How long do they read on average per session? So when they open a book, are they able to sit there and read for 15 minutes, 20 minutes? Or are they not quite there? Are they only reaching 10 minutes at a time? All of this data is really important because number one, it lets you inform your purchase decisions. So it's going to let you know where your students need more modalities, whether they need to have access to more audiobooks, whether their reading their reading time is more sustained in a certain type of book. It gives you that level of insight. You're also going to be able to see how individual students are reading, specifically if you assign books in your classroom or for your curriculum. If you assign books, you can see right down to, at a given moment, how far has a student made it through that book that you've assigned. How many times have they opened that book that you've assigned? So it's going to really give you that insight to know, okay, this student really is engaging with the book, whereas maybe this student has not been reading it, has not looked at it. It's going to let you guide intervention strategies. And I know that's one of the things we've gotten a lot of questions about here. When you're selecting books, there are so many different ways to provide scaffolding for students that need different modalities. If you're reading a particular book in your class, maybe you need the graphic novelization of that. Maybe you need the young readers edition. Maybe you need to make sure that you have an audiobook for your students that are struggling to read the print book. There are just a number of different students that would benefit from these different types of modalities. So you're going to have the data to support that. And then you're going to be able to see usage trends. Like I said, what's your most popular type of book? When you're letting students select books for choice reading or independent reading, where are their interests? Where do those lie? Where you may not get the same feedback from students, you can get the hard data there to help you. This is an example of if you assigned the book. And it's important to note, we did get this question in the Q&A as well. When we talk about assignments, that needs to be done specifically with books that you've purchased for your school, for your Advantage account, as Tracy mentioned. That's because if you were able to assign the books through the Citywide Digital Library, as you can imagine, you could assign a particular book that's meant for the entire city to be using, and now you're monopolizing it at your school for the next 4 months, 5 months. So if you want to use a book in an extended capacity like that, specifically with assignments, it needs to be something you're purchasing for your school. If you do that, this is one of the benefits you get. So you could log on, you could assign it to your whole class, let's say 30 students, and then you could see, student A, student B, student C. Well, student A has read the book 44 times. They've had 44 unique reading sessions. They've spent 10 hours and 30 minutes reading the book across those 44 sessions, and they've made it 100% of the way through the book. Student B has had 29 sessions for a total time of 6 hours and 40 minutes, and they've made it 78% through the book. Student C has only had 13 sessions for a total of 3 hours and 35 minutes, and they've made it 30% of the way through the book. This is not to be Big Brother, and just like any other piece of data, this is meant to help you. It's all about how you use the data. But imagine knowing this and not having to do, a particular reading comprehension check that maybe the student just didn't understand what was happening in the book, and so they get some questions wrong, but you know that they're reading it. Or imagine being able to very discreetly have a conversation with a student to say, hey, I noticed you're not really, reading this book. What's going on? Is there anything we can talk about? Is there anything we can do to make this easier? So it's a very good tool to have at your disposal. And then, of course, we want to talk about how you can support all students. And that's a really important factor here. Number one, just by showing all of your students this platform, the Citywide Digital Library and Sora, you're making sure that everyone's on the same page. So it's not that it's an app specifically for students that need scaffolding, which might set them apart a little bit, might make them feel insecure in using that. But you're using the same thing for everybody. Apart from that, though, we mentioned you've got the multilingual interface and text. So not just the app itself, but we've got books in Spanish and Chinese and Hindi and Russian and Ukrainian and German and French and many other languages. So you've got that for ELL students or students that are acquiring a second language. We've got lots of audiobooks and also read-alongs to support not only those ELL students, but dyslexic students to reinforce phonics skills that students are learning as they're developing reading skills, and struggling readers as well. I also want to mention audiobooks are great for students that have had sports injuries or concussions. It's oftentimes a few days or even weeks where students can't be engaging with a screen and even shouldn't be reading a book, but they can listen to an audiobook during that time. As Tracy mentioned at the beginning, though, really, we're preparing these students for a digital world. This is really not about replacing print at all. I know both Tracy and I will attest. We both read print books. We are print advocates. We are advocates for reading in any way. And there are going to be students at your school that are comfortable reading print books, and that's fantastic. But you'll be surprised with how many students are actually waiting to be shown a digital platform, because that's how they will connect. That's what they're missing, the ability to adjust the text, the ability to take control of some of these tools here. So really, you want to be able to give everybody the option that fits them best. And beyond that, you ensure that students always have access to books. These books are available 24/7 on any device, no matter where in the world your student happens to be at that time. So as we get ready for summer break and your students are going to be outside of the school, for many students, that may be the only place where they have reliable access to books on a consistent basis. And now you're giving them this mobile digital library in which they can access thousands of books within the blink of an eye. So just keep in mind the power that that has to be able to hand that to your students, especially before we reach summer vacation. So what are your next steps? Number one, you could activate your school's Advantage account. As Tracy mentioned, reach out to your school librarian if you have one. If you don't, reach out to your school administrator and talk about getting that set up and what that would look like. Number two, schedule a time to meet with your Sora team, Tracy, myself, and the rest of your NYC Sora team. Number three, explore this link. And I know Gabriella put it in the chat as well, but it's simply discoversora.com/NYC. This is going to give you much more information on the platform itself, some how-tos, some training resources. And if you go to the For Educators tab, lots of promotional marketing materials, letters to parents, multilingual how-to sheets, all sorts of stuff that you will benefit from. We're just at the end of time here, so we don't have time for Q&A. We've been trying to answer as many of the questions as possible, but you can see here our contact info. If you still have questions, please feel free to visit our digital booth at the Beyond Access page. Feel free to email us, nycsora@overdrive.com, or as I mentioned, visit that website, discoversora.com/NYC. And I believe the deck will be made available after the day's event. So thank you very much. Feel free to reach out to us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Sorry that we didn't get every question answered, but feel free to email us and we will answer them directly. Oh no, Regis, you said it, but I'm saying it again.